Puera natus est nobis, et filius datus est nobis, cuius imperium superum erum eius, invocabitur nomen eius, magni concilii angelus. Cantate Domino canticum novum, quia mirabilia fecit. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Puera natus est nobis, et filius datus est nobis, cuius imperium superum erum eius, invocabitur nomen eius, magni concilii angelus. When the fullness of time had come, there is a plenitude in the air on this day, the last of 2016, the last hours of this year before we begin what is perhaps a year of cosmic history. Who knows what is in the air? 2017. The fullness of time, to pleroma tu chanu. This is something which, if we're careful, will not pass us over in vain. The hours between one year and another. It's not that long since we had the hours between one century and another, which was also that of one millennium to another. Time passes, said Don Thomas in Under Milk Wood. Listen, time passes. One time I was preaching on this theme and quoting that line in a homily, and there was a person in the congregation who was listening and actually copied it down. Some years later he died, and the person came to the door saying that this person had died, and they wanted me to know that that had happened. So over I went, and I noticed that the good priest who was preaching the homily at his burial had picked up from his prayer book that this quotation and my comment on it was actually written in it. He'd written down, listening to every word, what had touched him in that homily, and it had come out, obviously, when he was dead, but well prepared, for he was someone who took time seriously and was listening carefully to every word and every grace. Interesting how a word that goes into the air can actually land on somebody's ear and have an effect. Time matters, and we put out into the air words, and in words power to heal. Therefore it is important that as time passes now between one ear and another, we look at this valuation of moments, the valuation of seconds, that we actually take seriously the challenge not to let them trickle through our hands without being blessed, without being graced, without being energized. It's rather like a conveyor belt. if one can imagine a conveyor belt, which is actually that of time, bringing on it, at each part of it, candles, well, we are being asked, as these candles pass before us on the conveyor belt of time, to light each candle as it passes. Supposing we miss one, and we try then afterwards to catch up with it as it goes along the conveyor belt to light it because we missed it at the proper time, then we will miss 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 afterwards because we won't be able to catch up, and we will lose then a whole series of candles. So it is with the seconds that pass through us. We ignite them as they pass. We live the grace of the present moment. And it is a whole teaching given by Père de Caussade. The sacrament of the present moment contains in it all that is necessary for its sanctification, if we live it, and if we live it in the will of God, because that is the bottom line. If we're outside the will of God as we live it, we're not graced. We're not using what is coming to us. We're outside the order of things. That is the important thing, to make sure that as we pass through the game of time, each one is under the lordship of Christ, the will of God. And once we're in that, then we are maintained within our grace of state. We do well what we're asked to do at that moment within the context of our life and our state. And therefore, what is asked of one person is not that asked of another person. The mother of a family has her duty of state, the priest has his, but we must do what we're asked to. And if we are happy to spend much time without using those moments well, for instance, passive viewing of useless television, then we're not in the will of God at that point, and those moments are passing by unignited. They're wasted moments, and indeed there can be negative moments. If we're genuinely outside the will of God, we're not using time and we're not in intimacy with Christ. So it's kind of important, as we start a new year, to look at the game of time. It will only come once, and it is said that those who die see on one great video their life and all the forgotten bits. That's when we realize that time is not just passing but actually written, and it is going to be seen again, for although it has passed, it has not passed, and it will live again as we are judged and as we see our life. Things are noted. I remember hearing this one time from a friend who was a seminarian, and it was said, with regard to behavior in the seminary, it will be observed, that is, that certain things are happening, and he was told this: nothing will be said, but it will be noted. So it is with regard to our passing. The one who gives us time is patient and silent. He does not immediately step in, but things are written on the book that we write. We write our book of life, and this is indelible. It is true that we obtain forgiveness. However, we must be aware that we write history, and that history is written. This moment, right now, I stamp it thus, and thus stamped will it go into eternity, thus lived, once only, forever. So time is important. The way we write our chapters on a daily basis is important. We will never unwrite what we have written. As Pilate said, "What I have written, I have written." And so it is that we do well to listen to the Aaronic blessing in the first reading, an ancient blessing, still used actually. It is one of the formula that we can use in the Mass itself at the end, and concluding things with regard to possible benedictions. It is one, I believe, that is still there. It's certainly around and heard often, because of the supplementary benedictions that one can give at the end of a celebration. They're given at the back of the missal. This is from Numbers, chapter 6. But we know from the book of Ecclesiasticus, chapter 50, that the blessing was pronounced each morning at the hour of sacrifice. The shining of God's face is an expression of His delight in His people. And Hebrew is always concrete. Therefore it will use expressions regarding the body. Here, the face of God. Not that He has a body, but it is spoken in anthropomorphic terms. And then this radiance, the shining, the beaming, the smiling. Don't children paint the sun with a big smile? And then something of that bliss and warmth of heaven's shining comes in the psalm. It's actually, no doubt, a psalm of thanksgiving at harvest time. Psalm 66. Harvest thanksgiving, and it gathers the precious grain of heavenly blessing. We do well to be grateful at the end of a year. Classically, there is the solemn Te Deum at the end of the year. Many churches still have it, especially on the continent. And why not? We do well to think of these things that we've received over the past year and not to presume upon things. Even the classic habit of saying thanks at the end of a meal is important. We do not just take and snatch from creation, but refer it to its giver. For eating is also the perpetuation of life, and we forget that we owe it to someone. The psalm, however, does close on a universal tone. It talks about the way that God is actually guiding all the peoples. So, the reading from Galatians, of course, is in a wider context. The apostle is speaking quite clearly, even bluntly, to the Galatians who had been led astray from the faith that he had taught them. They had been enticed by people who were recuperating elements of Judaism, unnecessarily in their case. So, Jesus, Son of Mary, had in reality freed them as slaves were freed from the law and given them the status of adopted sons. And here we have the Aramaic coming in, Abba. We find that on the lips of our blessed Saviour. The word we have still in the expression abbot. The abbot is the Abba of his community. Avi, this root is in Hebrew, but Aramaic is very closely linked with Hebrew. In present-day Arabic, Yabba is very similar. So there's a tenderness, an intimacy coming in here, and therefore relationship, and that explains what the apostle is trying to say. If we have this notion of daddy coming in, it's quite different from that of legalism, which he would want to have them freed from and not going back into a kind of comfort zone. So let's see if that's the case also as we start this year. Is there genuine relationship, filial relationship, bonding, the Abba element coming in? Do I spend my time in a state of gazing and warmth, of intimacy and repose? Or am I somehow just obeying a religion? Because we have more than a religion, we have relationship, and there has to be a buzz. That's actually a great difference between our faith and Islam. One wonders how much relationship there is with a personal God in the Islamic setup. It's not the same at all, if one looks at the way they operate mentally. Their notion of God is very different. We are invited to have a relationship with our best friend. Jesus of Nazareth is our brother, our elder brother, as well as our Saviour, and we are invited also to learn something of the repose of John, the beloved disciple, who was able to repose himself, his head, his tired head, on the breast of the Saviour. That we can do in adoration, and much adoration will happen, fortunately, over this night. It is the night over the planet on which possibly God is most offended, along with Halloween. It is a night of drunkenness and all that goes with it, because it is feasted hugely over the whole planet, but often without reference to the giver of time. So adoration is in order. It is a good thing to adore at night, And we must remember how Satan is at work, especially between 3 and 4 a.m. every night, because of satanic rites. With regard to the Gospel of St. Luke, details we have here, surely from the Blessed Virgin herself. She would have been very close to the early apostolic band, and tradition has it that Luke, the author, was also a painter, and therefore the initiator of Christian iconography. We have icons coming down to us that are said to have been painted by him. It is even said that the one in Czestochowa is actually of that nature, and that the wound that we see there was the result of someone trying to attack it. There are icons here and there that do bear miraculous traces. For instance, there's one at Irviron on Mount Athos, that was attacked, and it started to bleed, and the blood is on the cheeks of the icon. Let us then, as we start this new year, ask ourselves, am I using the moment? And by the way, to use well the moment is not to cram it to the utmost, it's to feel it. And therefore a certain simplicity, absence of multiplicity, complication, is a huge help. We don't have to approach this year with this mentality that I must be in maximal mode all the time. As with friends, we feel each other's company when we are just happy not to have to figgle around or talk all the time and block out every moment of silence. So it is with our Saviour. We need a certain holy simplicity and a waiting mode to let him enter in. Our God is a God of simplicity. In the manger, there was not a huge amount of noise. It was actually not hugely comfortable, but God provided. Central heating was provided by the breath of the animals. The angels provided the chorus, and those angels found the simplest recipients of the message. Not Herod, but the shepherds, who at that time were not listening to RTE or engaging with a mobile phone, but just looking at the stars from which the Saviour came. Ubi venit plenitudo temporis. When the fullness of time had come. Lines written in retreat before the Blessed Sacrament on the eve of ordination, adoring and also rehearsing the melodies of the Mass, including those of the consecration itself. "'Tis the eve of all, and in the blood that washed the world, I stand afresh and wait at the altar of the Lamb. For very God, of very God, awaits behind heaven's gate. The thunder of the Word, once heard of yore, by prophet and by sage, by priest and king, awaits behind this yet sealed door, o'er which my angel friend soft spreads his wing. Tomorrow this thy hand, thy voice, thine all, O small and hid Jehovah, shall me reach from all the eras gone, and one vast call, heard well by waiting cherubs, shall hence teach the molecules of time to move along a path here traced by but a bar of song.